Greetings, classicists. Hope we are doing okay. Welcome to the last lesson of the week, where we will be looking at Thermopylae, one of the most famous battles in the ancient and modern world. So let us get stuck straight in. Now, some of you, especially if you've been exploring some of the more weird and wonderful corners of the internet, may have seen this phrase before. Molon Labe, and this is the response of Leonidas to Xerxes. Now, at Thermopylae, this is according to Plutarch rather than Herodotus, a later historian, but a good story nonetheless. Xerxes approached Leonidas and the Spartans and asked them to surrender their weapons, and Leonidas' simple response was, "Come and take them," and that is what Molon Labe means, come and take. So a short but pithy response from Leonidas. Now this phrase is used by American sort of, I can't remember what the amendment is. It the Second Amendment where you're allowed to own guns? I can't remember which one, but anyway, you'll see this a lot on sort of t-shirts and mugs and things in various parts of America, and it's referring back to Leonidas and the Spartans, but it's obviously more about modern American politics. So you can see how classics once again is integrated with everything. And it's an interesting, it's a weird one, because it's an interesting debate that I think would have maybe struck some chords with the Greeks themselves. You know, who has the right to come and take your weapons? You know, for the Greeks and their freedom and their sense of identity, it's a very sort of powerful thing, you know, inherently connected with who they are. And the same can be said for these American sort of gun rights activists. I think it is, and I think that's where classics can be quite useful in drawing these parallels and looking at people who, you know, I suspect there are very few of you who agree that people should be allowed to run around with assault rifles and so on and so forth. But and so it's easy to look at them and sort of look down on them and think they're sort of psychopathic lunatics, which some of them I'm sure are. But you know, if you explore it through the eyes of the Spartans maybe and the Greeks and freedom, you may see a slightly different side. Not that you have to agree with it or even should agree with it, but sometimes classics can just give you that another dynamic, another way of looking at things, I hope. And for those of you who are not interested in guns and freedom, there's another issue: puppies. Anyway, right. So there we go. I think I've covered all my demographic: guns and puppies. Lovely. So let us move on. Now, a few quick questions just to consider before we explore the Battle of Thermopylae itself. So first of all, why did the Greeks want to fight at Thermopylae? And what other strategy were the Peloponnesians keen to adopt? Now, these things have been mentioned briefly in the reading that you should have done. You know, hopefully you've picked up on them, but if you haven't, don't panic. Now, remember who the Peloponnesians are. The Peloponnesians are the people who occupy the Peloponnese, which is that almost island section of Greece where the Spartans live, and the Spartans control a big chunk of it, but there's also you know, a fair few other cities. Corinth and Olympia is down there as well. So there's a lot. You know, the Peloponnesians are a sort of a big group. Hang on, sweetie, stop. Thank you. Sorry, she's digging the sofa for some reason. Anyway, so why did the Greeks want to fight at Thermopylae? Well, Thermopylae is a very sensible place to fight for the Greeks because it is a very thin or narrow valley, and you've got this, well, sort of not quite valley, because you've got the sea on one side and you've got the mountains on the other, and you've got this quite narrow track, and this chain of mountains runs across you know, a huge chunk of Greece, and this is one of the few sort of simple and easy ways to go. Now, it's important to remember that the Persians need to be moving along the coast because their ships are providing them with food and supplies and all that sort of thing. So the Persians can get, you know, they could maybe try and find another way, but that would be causing them some very serious supply issues. So really they do need to get through on this coastal road. And the Greeks can use the kind of terrain against the Persians. You can block this road with, as the Greeks do with, 3,000 or 4,000 well-trained soldiers, not all of them Spartan, but 3,000 or 4,000 well-trained soldiers managed to hold up 2 million plus Persians. And it's only a bit of Persian trickery that actually allows them to break through. So Thermopylae is a very sensible strategic place for the Greeks to fight. Now, the other strategy that the Peloponnesians were keen to adopt, as we'll see in a bit, is to turn the Peloponnese into a fortress by building a wall across the little narrow bridge of land that connects it to the rest of Greece. And this is one of the reasons why the Spartans don't send their whole army up to Thermopylae. There's obviously a debate about this. There's a bit of Spartan politics and religion going on. Again, it's supposed to be there's this religious festival that means the Spartans can't leave. But a lot of historians have said, well, that's probably not entirely true. The Spartans didn't want to leave Sparta. They wanted to use their troops to defend the Peloponnese, their homeland, rather than marching up into the north of Greece to defend it from there. So Leonidas' actions really are the sort of result of a political and strategic dispute between the Spartans. But we'll have a look at that a bit later on. So this is the Peloponnese from the air. So as you can see from this map, you'll see there's a kind of little thin grey line. That's actually the Corinth Canal. So it's such a short stretch of land that the Greeks themselves have dug a canal. And it's quite, if you've got vertigo, it's got these great narrow sides, and you get these liners kind of going through with sort of 3 foot either side of them. It's really quite a kind of scary thing to watch. But it is, it's really not a very long piece of land, and if you fortify that with a spectacular series of walls and forts, and then you stick 10,000 Spartans behind that wall, that's going to be plus all the other people in the Peloponnese. That is going to be a tough nut to crack. Now, obviously, the significant issue with that is it's all very well lining the Spartans up behind the wall, but if the Persians just jump in ships and sail around it, then you're screwed, as the Greeks debate and discuss and point out later on in a council. But anyway, this is what a lot of the Peloponnesians want to do. Now, what I think this is a fascinating film. It's a good thing to do, and it's only about 10 minutes. If you're really pushed for time, you could skip it, but I wouldn't. It's a laugh. There's a very interesting film called 300, which depicts the Spartan battle against the Persians at Thermopylae. Now, it's not supposed to be historical, and it's based on a comic, and lots of people sort of mock it for its lack of historical inaccuracy and its sort of almost absurd stylization of the Greeks and Persians. But I think a lot of people are missing the point. I think Herodotus would have absolutely loved it, because it takes so many of the Herodotean stereotypes and ideals of both Spartans and Persians and sort of explodes them onto screen. So I actually think it's brilliant. Don't refer to it in the exam, but I think actually in terms of reminding you of the difference between Greeks and Persians, it's brilliant. So I'll put the link up in the assignment because I want you to think about these things, and these are all crucial to Herodotus. So how can you see them in these two clips from 300? So nudity and clothing, what's the difference? Again, go back to the old classics. The Spartans are barely wearing anything. You've got your heroic nudity. The Persians really are clothed with with trousers, with soft robes, with excessive patterning, with almost a kind of Persian style kidaris with excessive gold. It's almost like a kind of modern Herodotus in some ways, although that would be considered blasphemy in certain quarters. So anyway, have a look. Can you jot down a few ideas where you think 300 ties in with Herodotus, leadership, numbers, discipline, motivation, bravery, etc., etc. So hopefully that's mildly entertaining. Don't spend too long doing it, as I say. Now, let's just remind ourselves of who Leonidas was. So Leonidas was the Heraclid king. Now, remember, there are two Spartan kings descended from two different families. And Leonidas is one of those kings, and he is from the group of Spartan kings who are descended from Hercules or Heracles, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So he's the Heraclid king, and that is important with regard to prophecies and a few other issues as well. Now, as we talked about before, Leonidas was engaged in debate with other Spartans about what the Spartans should do. Should they march the whole Spartan army as far north as possible and attempt to block the Persians at the pass at Thermopylae long before the Persians get anywhere near Sparta or the Peloponnese? So that's one strategy, but obviously your whole army is away from Sparta. It's fighting in someone else's territory, and it's fundamentally not fighting for Sparta, one could argue, although it certainly is in a sort of strategic and meaningful sense. So anyway, they have this debate, and Leonidas understands that really the Greeks need to start working together as a whole group. You know, the Spartan army needs to team up with the other armies and march as far north as possible to take on the Persians. You know, it's not really time to think about your own individual cities. Other Spartans disagree, and as a result, the Spartan army is not allowed to march north. Now, this could be because it was a religious festival, and remember, the Spartans are absolutely religious and superstitious. They take it very seriously. So I wouldn't dismiss that out of hand. However, a lot of academics feel that it was probably more of an excuse to prevent the troops leaving Sparta. So anyway, Leonidas leaves Sparta with 300 men who are his personal bodyguards. So that's not the Spartan army leaving, that's just Leonidas and his personal bodyguards sort of going for a stroll in northern Greece, if you like, to kind of get round the religious rules. So he leaves with 300 men and other men from other cities in the Peloponnese. The 300 Spartans fighting the 2 million Persians does happen at the end, more or less. But I think it's important to remember Leonidas is leading a Peloponnesian force of between 4,000 and 6,000 men. So it's not just 300 Spartans, although they stand out and their bravery is exemplary. And it is 300 Spartans, more or less, by the end. Now, another thing that's really important about Leonidas, as you'll have seen from the reading, is that there is a prophecy. And the prophecy says that a king from the line of the Heraclids must die, otherwise Persia will win the war. So Leonidas is aware of this prophecy, and he is marching out to die for the good of his city. And perhaps that's one reason why he sort of stays and fights at Thermopylae, because he is doing his duty. By fighting the Persians, he's obviously preventing them invading Greece, but also he realizes a king must die, a Heraclid king must die for the Greeks to win, and so he is sacrificing himself for the cause. And again, if you're looking for a comparison with Xerxes, you just couldn't get more opposite. Xerxes at Thermopylae is sitting on a throne at the back of the battle, jumping up and down in fear when things don't go his way, and Leonidas is explicitly marching out to die for the good of his people and for Greece. Now, Leonidas is also married to Gorgo, who is who, if you remember back to the Ionian Revolt and Cleomenes and Aristagoras, was the girl who told Cleomenes to dismiss the slightly sneaky and slippery Aristagoras, otherwise he would be morally ruined. So Gorgo is a sort of a powerful, interesting figure herself. Gorgo is also famous for code breaking. So the Greeks send a message, the Ionian Greeks send a warning message to the Spartans on a blank wax tablet, and the Spartans look at it and go, well, this seems a bit weird, there's no real message here. But Gorgo realizes that you need to actually scrape off the wax, and they've carved a message into the wood underneath. So the wax is obviously where you would sort of write and then wipe it clean and write. It's like a sort of chalkboard or whatever. And Gorgo is the one who understands where the message is hidden, and thus they read the message and take the warning and so on and so forth. So Gorgo is important, and Gorgo is smart and married to King Leonidas. So let me just pause this. So obviously this bit will not work quite so well as a remote lesson, but this is something you should have done for the reading homework. At the end of the sort of reading / revision questions, there was a grid full of the key areas to pick out. So, ring a friend, message a few people over Teams, start a Reddit group about Thermopylae. I'm sure there are plenty there already. Do whatever it is that you wish, but we're going to skip on and talk through them. So the question is, how does Thermopylae show the difference between Greeks and barbarians? And there are so many different things to pick out here, and we'll go through some of the main ones that I'd really like you to take on board. So let's look at how the battle starts, or rather sort of pre-battle. So pre-battle, the Spartans and their allies are lined up in the pass at Thermopylae. Leonidas builds or rebuilds a wall across the path, so straight away he's thinking strategically and sensibly. And they, the troops are lined up to block the pass when the Persians arrive. Now, Xerxes sends out a spy on horseback to go and see who's there, what they're doing, and so on and so forth. And they see the Spartans. Who they've obviously seen the vast and huge Persian army. But the Spartans are just there, sort of exercising naked, combing their hair in a very calm, peaceful, serene fashion. And they see the spy, but they don't attempt to kill him or chase him off or do anything like that. They just let the spy watch the Spartans doing their kind of pre-battle, or rather pre-death ritual, as Demaratus points out. So these Spartans are here to die, and they are completely unafraid of doing so. But again, we've got that kind of nudity versus clothing dynamic. Exercising naked discipline. Remember, way back at the beginning of Herodotus, he says the barbarians have an absolute taboo against nudity. So we see the Spartans showing completely the opposite. Now, Xerxes doesn't attack immediately. He sits there and lets 4 days go by because he thinks the Greeks will just run away in fear of his vast army. But again, this is because Xerxes doesn't understand the reasons why the Greeks fight, and the Persians rarely do. So remember Hydarnes with the story of Sperthias and Bulis. He says, "Come and be the great king's friend. He'll give you limitless wealth." And Spartans basically say, "Yeah, but we wouldn't be free." Mardonius earlier on doesn't understand why the Greeks win. He says, "Well, we've got more money and we've got more men. So why on earth would the Greeks think they could win?" And Xerxes is the same. He waits at Thermopylae for the Greeks to run away because obviously he's got more men. So why would you stay and fight? And he especially doesn't understand the Spartans. And Demaratus points out that when the Persians attack and are brutally slaughtered by the Spartans on the fourth day, Xerxes realizes, for all the mass of humanity, he had very few real men. So that's talking of, really, that's just an excellent quote about the Greeks and their manliness. So the Persians may be male, but they're not manly, if that makes any sense. Now, the Spartans. So once the Persians have started attacking, then we get a brilliant display of Spartan discipline and organization. So the Spartans, the Persians charge into the Spartans will stab them a bit and then turn tail and run away. And the Persians will think that the Spartans are defeated, so they lose all kind of order and discipline and go charging after the Spartans. And then the Spartans stop, turn around together, and boom, cut off however many thousand Persians and butcher them all before reforming the line and going back to where they were beforehand. And this is the most difficult military maneuver that you can ever do, because once people start running away, even if it's fake, it's so easy for that to turn into a real running away. And it's very, very dangerous because you have to obviously stop and turn around together. You have to do it at the right time. It's a very, very technical maneuver for a whole unit to do. And the Spartans do this repeatedly and often, and the Persians fall for it repeatedly and often because the Spartans are so good at it. Now, Xerxes even sends in, so the first day he sends in the Medes, who are very similar to the Persians, but they're not Persian, and they get absolutely butchered by the Greeks. Then next he sends in the Persians, the relatively regular Persian soldiers, and they get absolutely butchered. And then he sends the Immortals. And this is obviously important, as we talked about before, because the Immortals are the elite troops of Persia, and the Spartans are the elite troops of Greece. So the Immortal versus Persian fight, if you like, is representative of a sort of a clash of cultural excellence, the best of the Greek world versus the best of the Persian world. And I think one of the reasons why Herodotus makes such a deal of the numbers of the Immortals is again to emphasize the difference. So you have 300 Spartans and their allies, but their role tends to be downplayed for dramatic reasons. And there's also no doubt that the Spartans are the ones, leading the campaign, driving things forward, doing the more complicated maneuvers. So don't underestimate the other Greeks who are there. But the Spartans are driving it forward. So we have the Spartans, 300 Spartans taking on 10,000 Persian Immortals, and the Immortals, as with everyone else, get absolutely butchered. Do not underestimate how absolutely lethal the Spartans are. Up close and personal in a little kind of European river valley where no one can get around the sides. The Spartans in a hoplite phalanx is almost undefeatable. And Xerxes has no real answer to this. And when he sees the Immortals being butchered before his eyes, he leaps up from his throne 3 times in kind of shock and horror. And this is a really important little scene because, first of all, we see Xerxes is not on the front line. He's not even close. He's on a high throne at the back. You could not get more detached. You could not get more cowardly. You could not get more opposite to Leonidas leading from the front. Sorry, puppy's chewing something. Now, he does it 3 times, and he is terrified, even though he is behind 2 million men. He's leaping up in horror, and that's a bit absurd. That's a bit ridiculous. He's looking at people sort of, hundreds of meters away, if not further. So he's not engaged in the conflict, and he's not really doing any leading, and he's still terrified of what's going on. Now, relatively early on in the fighting, the Persians decide that they're really not interested in this. They're not fighting for freedom. They're not fighting for kind of identity or anything along those lines. They are fighting because their officers wielded whips and lashed them. So again, we see the slaves being whipped into battle versus the free men fighting them. Now, other issues to pick out is that 2 of Xerxes' brothers fell in battle over the corpse of Leonidas. So during the course of the battle, Leonidas is killed. Because he's fighting on the front rank, he's taking great risks. He wants to die, but he's not trying to kill himself. Sort of recklessly or in a futile way. He wants to die in the most efficient, effective sort of way possible for Greece, for Sparta, and for his men. But he dies, and the Greeks and Persians have a huge fight over his body. The Greeks because they want to bury it, the Persians because they want to desecrate it. And Xerxes at the end actually cuts off Leonidas's head, and puts it on a stick, which is just unbelievable hubris and blasphemy and savagery. Desecrating a corpse is a real crime. Once someone dies, their body in effect belongs to the gods, and Xerxes is once more showing unbelievable hubris. So the fighting is so tough that 2 of Xerxes' brothers fall in battle over the corpse of Leonidas. So the Spartans are killing, Persian royalty at this point, and Xerxes still not taking part. You could also view this as a sort of suggestion, maybe that even Xerxes' brothers are slaves. They've been sort of sent into battle with everyone. It's only the Persian state that consists of one man, and everyone else is a slave. Now, the Spartans are left more or less by themselves because the Persians do find a way round. Weirdly, a Greek called Ephialtes betrays the Spartans and the Greeks and tells the Persians that there's actually a way round a sort of secret kind of goat track. And the Persians send the Immortals along this track, and they kind of the Spartans realise that this is going to happen. They're going to be encircled, so they send most of the other allies away because you don't want to waste the troops, but the Spartans stay there because otherwise if everyone left, they'd be chased back to Greece and the army would be destroyed. So the Spartans stay there to stop the Persians truly sort of catching up and being right on their tails and giving everyone else a chance to get away. So we do see more or less the Spartans versus the Persians at this stage. Now, the Spartans obviously fight unbelievably bravely. They slaughter many more thousands of Persians, but after a while, their swords break, their shields are snapped. Their spears are snapped, and they're down to defending themselves with fists and teeth because they simply will not give up. They're punching and biting Persians to death. And this resistance is so ferocious that at the very end, the Persians decide to just finish them off with a hail of missiles, and they can't overcome the Spartans really on a kind of face-to-face manly basis. So they surround them with archers and just sort of pepper them all to death. And there's a famous sort of joke from one of the Spartans who, on seeing the size of the Persian forces and the number of arrows in the sky, says, well, this is a good thing because at least we will fight in the shade. So that kind of Spartan wit, that total kind of lack of fear of death. And remember, it's not death that the Spartans fear, it is the law. Now, we also see a classic example of sort of Greek heroism and the nature of Spartans, because there are two individuals who are ill with eye infections, and one of them is Eurytus. And at the in this sort of final phase of the battle, Eurytus realizes that things are not going well, and he demands that his helot, his slave, puts on his armor and gives him his weapon and points him in the right direction. Because of his eye infection, he's blind, he can't see. So Eurytus is so obsessed with doing his duty and being brave and doing the right thing. He's basically kind of lined up and set off, and he goes sort of charging into the Persians and obviously dies. So this is the behaviour that one expects from a Greek, from a Spartan, and the contrast again with the Persians couldn't be more extreme. Now, at the end of Thermopylae, obviously, there's a war to be fought. But when the Greeks do win it, they return to Thermopylae and put up a memorial. And it's very interesting what the Spartans have on their memorial. It isn't necessarily about numbers. It's not necessarily about glorious deeds. It's not necessarily about specific individuals, although there is a separate sort of there are some other memorials to specific individuals. But the most important thing for the Spartans is this. Report to the people of Lacedaemon, stranger, that here, obedient to their law, we lie. So what is the primary motivation of the Spartans at Thermopylae? They want people to know that we obeyed the law. They're very proud of killing, tens of thousands of Persians. They're very proud of all these things. That no doubt the most important thing to them is that we obeyed law. And again, you can't get a deeper contrast with Xerxes, who, like we saw before, there isn't really any law, is there? I mean, there's control, but Xerxes can cut someone's head off when he's angry. He can kill someone if they insult him. He can giggle when someone insults him. He can ignore people who insult in inverted commas. It's all based on the kind of whims of the tyrannical Xerxes. There isn't a sort of rigid code of laws, civilized code of laws that individuals need to follow, and that all individuals must follow. Look at the duty of Leonidas. Look at Leonidas respecting and obeying the law and his duty to his city. Things that he puts well above his own life, well-being, and happiness. So I always find that quite a touching sort of memorial in some ways. It's not, it's interesting to sort of put it in context. We're not looking at a modern society. We're looking at, the world, almost 3,000 years ago. No, well, two and a half thousand years ago. So this idea that there are things like duty to your people, to your state, that rights such as law and citizenship exist. I think it's very easy to underestimate the revolutionary nature of these ideas. They're so ingrained in us that we don't consider how special they are. But I think they truly are. And I think a king, an individual sacrificing themselves for the law, for order, for structure. I think there's certainly something to be respected there. And we'll have a look, really. Sorry, dog's decided she likes chewing power cables, which is a fairly short-term hobby. Sweetie, hang on. So I think this is one thing that I always find really interesting about this story. How do we judge Leonidas? So I think especially in these sort of slightly hysterical modern times, it's an interesting question. So, Leonidas was the leader of basically a genocidal, xenophobic state with institutionalized sexual child abuse, slavery, child murder, just a whole series of things that are obviously completely unacceptable in a modern sense, and some of them were sort of considered unacceptable at the time. So you could depict the Spartans as truly evil, and obviously by our modern standards, they a lot of the morals and values and ideals that they had were what we would describe as outright evil. On the other hand, Leonidas was utterly selfless, dedicated to his people, to his state, to laws, things that are sort of values that are just fundamental to the way free and what one would probably argue sort of some of the better societies on earth function. You have laws that apply to everyone. People are as free as they can possibly be. These are such powerful values. He was brave. He was utterly selfless and brave, and an amazing warrior, an amazing fighter. And a legend amongst men. So how do you actually judge someone like this? 'Cause it's just never that simple, is it? Where do you put Leonidas in terms of kind of how do you judge him as a man? Is he a good man? Is he a bad man? Where does he sit? And I think it's an interesting question, because we can say, well, this is 2,500 years ago. How do so it's so far detached from our society. We can look at the good things, acknowledge but play down the bad. Well, not play down, but acknowledge that the bad things are a product of his time and celebrate him as a positive individual. But then what happens when you're looking at someone 1,500 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 50 years ago? It's that kind of eternal question, isn't it? When do you apply the values of your society in making a judgment on others? And I don't offer any answer to that question, but it's one that I always find interesting when judging Leonidas and the Spartans. So what I would just like you to do now is have a look at the notes. So there's a summary of another battle that is happening at the same time as Thermopylae, and that is the Battle of Artemisium, and that's a naval battle. And the naval forces there consist of, again, a whole variety of different Greek states. They're led technically by a Spartan, but really he's only in sort of ceremonial control. The real brains behind that is an Athenian called Themistocles, and he's a very important character for Salamis and other things, as we'll see later on. So what I would like to do is have a read through this quick summary of the Battle of Artemisium and highlight again the difference between the Greeks and Persians. Where do we see different leadership? Where do we see different manliness? Where do we see a different depiction of numbers? Obviously the Persians have more. Where do we see different motivations? And again, Herodotus, you've always got to be be careful with Herodotus, because there are some, there are definitely stereotypes that he's trying to push across, like a Greek love of freedom and being motivated by the state and all this sort of stuff. It's absolutely there, and it's absolutely important that you understand this. But you do get Greeks who are motivated by different things. Some Greeks are too afraid to fight the Persians. Some Greeks do betray Greece for money. Ephialtes back at Thermopylae, for example. So Herodotus is never totally, black and white, and never and creating this completely unrealistic picture of the situation. Although, again, he does make some very clear kind of stereotypical distinctions on average or in general. So read through the Battle of Artemisium and highlight these sort of, see if you can get a couple of examples of each. Now, just with regard to the exam, you certainly won't be examined on, you won't get a question on Artemisium. You won't get a 10-mark question saying why did the Greeks win Artemisium or anything like that. But it's a really interesting battle. It's a good sort of, there's lots of kind of go-to examples of what's going, for sort of leadership, manliness, blah blah blah. So it's well worth doing. So you should do this in sort of 10-15 minutes. I think it also gives you an understanding of the story and why the Greeks end up in Salamis, not quite the final battle, but the most significant one, certainly from Herodotus's perspective. Brilliant. So that's more or less it. Do make sure that when you're watching these videos, you're writing down all the important stuff. Don't just sit there and attempt to passively absorb, because you won't. So, if it means pausing the video and taking more detailed notes, then do make sure that you do that, because it's all got to sink in somehow. And I don't know how long this cohort system will be going. So yeah, make sure you're doing it. And I will catch up with you in the next lesson. Take care, guys.